You are experiencing reality from within a timeline, but this is not the only timeline that exists. At this very moment, countless versions of reality coexist in the field of potential, vibrating beyond ordinary perception, available but not yet selected. Still, most people remain confined to a single repeating loop, replaying the same patterns, reaching the same outcomes, encountering the same limitations, and wondering why nothing truly changes, even when the desire for more is strong. This is not because reality is fixed, and it is not because change is being withheld. It happens because the internal system that selects experience has not shifted. Here is the first principle to understand. You are not anchored to a timeline by fate, destiny, or external circumstances. You are anchored by coherence. Your mind, body, emotional patterns, expectations, and nervous system together form a signal. That signal determines which version of reality becomes observable and lived. A quantum shift does not occur through effort, force, or intensity of wanting. It does not respond to wishing harder, visualizing longer, or repeating affirmations louder. The quantum field does not mirror intention alone, it mirrors state. When your internal system remains tuned to familiar emotional loops, habitual reactions, and subconscious expectations, the same timeline continues to collapse into experience. Even when the conscious mind desires change, the dominant signal may still belong to the old pattern. This is why manifestation is often misunderstood. Desire is not the activating force. Alignment is. The field responds to how consistently your internal state matches the frequency of the reality you intend to experience. You can repeat affirmations, create vision boards, and imagine new outcomes, yet still signal the old timeline if your body remains conditioned for fear, scarcity, or self-protection. The nervous system often holds on to what is familiar, even when that familiarity is limiting. Here is a critical distinction. The quantum does not respond to the loudest signal. It responds to the most coherent one. If the words you speak suggest abundance, but your body contracts around uncertainty, the contraction carries more informational weight than the words. If you imagine connection, but your emotional system remains guarded, the field registers distance, not intimacy. This is how people remain cycling through the same reality without realizing why. They attempt to change outcomes without changing the internal observer that collapses those outcomes. A quantum shift begins when identity, state, and expectation reorganize together. Not later, not after evidence appears, but now. Quantum physics suggests that all possible outcomes already exist simultaneously as potential. Shifting does not mean creating something new from nothing. It means transitioning into coherence with a version of reality that already exists within the field. The question is no longer, how do I get what I want? The more accurate question becomes, who must I be internally to naturally align with the timeline where this already exists? This shift is not performance. It is not pretending. It is not positive thinking layered over unresolved patterns. It is a reorganization of the system itself. Pause here. Notice which internal version of you has been making your choices. Notice which emotional tone has been guiding your reactions. These are not abstract ideas. They are active signals shaping experience. In the next section, we will explore the invisible forces that keep the system locked into repetition, including resistance, subconscious conditioning, and emotional imprinting. This is the layer that explains why understanding alone does not create transformation. Are you ready to explore it? So why do people remain stuck in the same loop, even when they understand the theory of quantum manifestation? It is not because they lack discipline. It is not because they want change too little. And it is not because they are doing something wrong. The real reason is more subtle and far more powerful. They are still entangled with the version of themselves that was shaped to survive the old timeline. That version may feel outdated, limiting, or even painful, but it is familiar, and the subconscious mind prioritizes familiarity over expansion. What is known feels safer than what is possible. The old timeline does not require your conscious agreement to continue. It only requires participation. Each repeated reaction, each familiar emotional response, each expectation of the same outcome reinforces the signal. Over time, this repetition becomes automatic. This is how a timeline maintains itself. In the brain, repeated emotional and behavioral patterns strengthen neural pathways. The more often a pathway is activated, the easier it becomes to follow. Eventually, the response no longer feels like a choice. It feels like reality. And at that point, the timeline is no longer something you are choosing. It is something that appears to be choosing you. Here is where quantum physics and neuroscience intersect. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect suggests that observation collapses a field of infinite potential into a single outcome. But observation is not limited to what you see with your eyes. You observe reality through belief, expectation, emotional tone, and identity. Now consider neuroscience. The majority of human behavior is driven by subconscious processes. Emotional conditioning, trauma responses, learned beliefs, and identity patterns operate below conscious awareness. This means that most of the time, it is not conscious intention collapsing the wave. It is subconscious programming. Let that settle. Many people attempt to manifest change from a small fraction of awareness, while the larger system remains tuned to fear, lack, control, or survival. And the quantum field responds to the dominant signal. This is why someone can change environments, relationships, or circumstances and still experience the same emotional patterns. The external context shifts, but the internal observer remains the same. And the same observer collapses the same type of reality. A timeline cannot shift if the observer has not shifted. So what keeps the observer anchored to the old loop? In most cases, the answer is resistance. Resistance rarely announces itself clearly. It hides behind overthinking, procrastination, emotional numbness, constant busyness, or logic that sounds reasonable but limits possibility. At its core, resistance is not a flaw. It is a protective mechanism. The system believes it is safer to remain where it is than to enter the unknown. This belief is not stored in thought alone. It lives in the body. Stored stress, unresolved emotion, suppressed responses, and inherited survival patterns are encoded into the nervous system. That is why intellectual understanding often fails to produce lived change. When the nervous system is dysregulated, it signals threat, even when the conscious mind says, "I am ready." This creates an internal contradiction, and the field responds to the contradiction by maintaining the familiar outcome. This is not personal. It is mechanical. It is how systems behave. Understanding this removes blame. The goal is not to fight the old timeline. The goal is to recognize what keeps feeding it. In the next section, we will explore how frequency, energy, and vibration function as organizing principles of reality, and why shifting timelines is less about effort and more about regulation and coherence. Stay with this. To understand how timelines actually shift, it helps to view reality through the lens of frequency rather than effort. Across physics, neuroscience, and ancient knowledge systems, one principle appears again and again. Systems organize themselves through vibration. Your life is not responding primarily to what you do, it is responding to what you are broadcasting. Every thought, emotional response, posture, breath pattern, and expectation contributes to an overall vibrational signature. This signature functions like a tuning mechanism, aligning you with certain outcomes while filtering out others. When the signal remains unchanged, the same version of reality continues to appear. This is why the language of energy, frequency, and vibration has persisted across cultures and disciplines. It is not symbolic, it is descriptive. Nikola Tesla once suggested that understanding the universe requires thinking in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. This insight points toward a deeper truth. Reality is structured by resonance. What aligns coherently tends to stabilize and repeat. Many people feel drawn to numerical patterns, harmonic ratios, or symbolic systems, such as sacred geometry. These are not random fixations. They reflect an intuitive recognition that reality follows patterned organization, not chaos. The quantum field is not passive, it is responsive, and it responds not to isolated intentions, but to sustained coherence. This is where many attempts at manifestation break down. The focus is placed on mental activity, while the rest of the system remains unchanged. The mind may be signaling expansion, while the body remains contracted. The words may suggest trust, while the emotional tone carries vigilance. The field does not average these signals. It follows the dominant pattern. This is why repeating affirmations without embodied alignment often produces frustration rather than results. The contradiction itself becomes the message. If abundance is desired, but the system remains braced for loss, the field receives the signal of instability. If connection is desired, but the system remains guarded, the field registers separation. These patterns are not moral failures. They are feedback mechanisms. At this level, identity becomes central. You are not simply a person moving through experiences. You are an identity structure generating a frequency within a responsive environment. And that identity has been shaped by conditioning, survival strategies, and past reinforcement. Over time, the frequency you broadcast can feel so familiar that it becomes mistaken for who you are. But familiarity is not identity. It is habit. Here is the important distinction. You do not shift timelines by rejecting the old identity. You shift by no longer feeding it. Attention is fuel. Emotional reaction is fuel. Repetition is fuel. When those inputs change, the pattern begins to lose coherence. The question to explore now is not how to force a new outcome, but where your system is still unconsciously reinforcing the old one. Where are fear and trust mixed together? Where is faith paired with bracing? Where is desire accompanied by hesitation? These contradictions do not block change. They reveal where alignment has not yet occurred. In the next section, we will examine how embodiment bridges this gap. How alignment moves beyond intellectual understanding and becomes lived, regulated, and sustainable. This is where real shifting begins. At this point, the question naturally becomes practical. If understanding alone does not create a quantum shift, what actually does? The answer lies in embodiment. Embodiment is the process through which insight becomes lived reality. It is not a mindset technique, and it is not symbolic behavior. It is the alignment of the nervous system, emotional tone, physical presence, and identity into a coherent state. Many people attempt to shift timelines through thought alone. They understand the concepts. They can explain the theory. They know what frequency they want to access. But the body has not yet learned that it is safe to inhabit that state, and the body is not secondary. The nervous system acts as a gatekeeper between possibility and experience. If the system perceives threat, instability, or uncertainty, it will default to familiar patterns, even when those patterns are limiting. This is why people can intellectually want expansion while physically resisting it. Embodiment begins when the body is brought into regulation. Regulation does not mean constant calm or positivity. It means the capacity to return to coherence after disruption. It means the ability to feel activation without collapse, uncertainty without panic, and openness without self-protection taking over. This is where identity shifts from concept to signal. You do not wait for the external world to validate the new timeline before embodying it. You embody the state first, and the external world reorganizes in response. This is not belief-based, it is feedback-based. Consider how this applies in real life. If the desired timeline involves abundance, embodiment may look like responding to financial uncertainty with steadiness rather than contraction. It may mean breathing through scarcity impulses instead of reacting automatically. It may mean engaging with resources from a place of trust rather than fear. If the desired timeline involves connection, embodiment may involve softening the body when the impulse is to close. It may involve choosing openness in moments where withdrawal feels safer. It may involve allowing vulnerability without immediately seeking control. If the desired timeline involves health, embodiment may involve treating the body as responsive and intelligent rather than broken. It may involve resting without guilt, moving with awareness, and listening to subtle signals rather than overriding them. The common thread is this: behavior changes not because circumstances have shifted, but because identity has. Embodiment is not dramatic. It is subtle and consistent. It shows up in posture, breath, tone of voice, and the way choices are made when no one is watching. This is why embodiment cannot be faked. The system knows when it is performing and when it is inhabiting, and the field responds accordingly. You do not shift timelines by doing more. You shift by becoming coherent. Before moving forward, pause and reflect. What does alignment feel like in your body? Where do you notice tension when you think about the life you desire? These sensations are not obstacles, they are information. In the next section, we will explore how small, consistent actions reinforce coherence and how micro-alignment becomes the mechanism through which timelines stabilize. Stay present with this. One of the most misunderstood aspects of quantum shifting is scale. Many people assume that moving into a new timeline requires dramatic action, radical transformation, or a complete overhaul of life circumstances. In reality, the quantum field responds to coherence, not magnitude. This is where the principle of micro-alignment becomes essential. Micro-alignment refers to small, consistent adjustments that bring the system into greater coherence with the desired state. These adjustments may appear insignificant on the surface, but energetically, they carry weight because they are done from alignment rather than urgency. A single breath taken consciously during a moment of fear can shift the signal more effectively than hours of forced visualization. A small choice made from trust can carry more coherence than a large action taken from desperation. Quantum reality is sensitive to quality, not quantity. This is why sustainable shifts often emerge quietly. The system reorganizes gradually, stabilizing around a new frequency through repetition and reinforcement. Over time, what once felt intentional begins to feel natural. Micro-alignment shows up in daily life in subtle ways. When scarcity thoughts arise, alignment may look like pausing instead of spiraling. It may look like acknowledging the fear without letting it dictate behavior. It may look like choosing presence over panic. When emotional withdrawal feels automatic, alignment may look like remaining open for a few seconds longer. It may look like softening the shoulders, relaxing the jaw, or allowing eye contact rather than shutting down. When self-criticism appears, alignment may look like interrupting the pattern with compassion rather than correction. It may look like choosing supportive inner language instead of reinforcement of inadequacy. These moments matter because they communicate identity. Each micro-aligned action tells the field, "This is who I am now." Not who you hope to become in the future, but who you are choosing to embody in the present moment. This is also where patience becomes part of coherence. The system will not shift instantly every time alignment is chosen. Old patterns may reappear. Emotional habits may resurface. This does not indicate failure. It indicates transition. The power is not in never reverting. The power is in returning. Every time awareness catches an old loop and gently redirects toward coherence, the new timeline gains stability. Over time, the return becomes faster. The old pattern loses momentum. The new state requires less effort to maintain. This is how identity reorganizes. It is not through force or suppression. It is through repetition of aligned experience until the system recognizes safety in the new state. Tools such as breathwork, meditation, sound, symbols, or numerical focus can support this process. They act as anchors for attention and regulation. But tools do not create the shift on their own. They work when they are used to reinforce embodied alignment. No ritual substitutes presence. No technique replaces consistency. The invitation here is simple. Choose one pattern you are ready to interrupt. Choose one small action that represents the version of you who already inhabits the desired timeline. Practice it with awareness today. The quantum responds to lived signals, and those signals are shaped one moment at a time. At this stage, it becomes important to address a subtle but critical misunderstanding. Many people believe that once they experience alignment, the shift is complete. They expect the new timeline to lock in permanently after a single moment of clarity or coherence. But quantum shifting does not work that way. The field does not respond to brief visits. It reorganizes around sustained presence. This is where most people disengage, not because the process is difficult, but because it requires something deeper than motivation. It requires consistency of state. Sustaining a shift does not mean maintaining a positive emotional tone at all times. It does not require suppressing doubt, discomfort, or challenge. What it requires is the capacity to return. Alignment is not a destination. It is a practice. Every system naturally oscillates. Emotions fluctuate. Attention wanders. Old patterns resurface. None of this reverses a shift. What determines stability is how quickly coherence is restored after disruption. Each return strengthens the signal. When the system notices contraction and chooses regulation instead of reaction, the new timeline becomes more familiar. When the body feels uncertainty and remains present rather than defensive, the frequency stabilizes. When the mind observes old narratives without immediately reinforcing them, identity loosens its attachment to the past. This is how the quantum field receives confirmation. It is not measuring perfection. It is measuring consistency. Many people approach manifestation as a conditional process. They expect external results to arrive before they allow themselves to relax, trust, or open. But the quantum field does not wait for conditions to change before responding. It mirrors the internal state in real time. This creates a paradox. The timeline does not shift when waiting ends. It shifts when waiting is no longer part of the signal. When the system no longer orients itself toward lack, anticipation, or postponement, coherence becomes dominant. And when coherence becomes dominant, the external configuration adjusts. This is why forcing outcomes weakens alignment. Force carries urgency. Urgency carries contraction. Contraction reinforces the old pattern. Stability emerges when the new state is lived without demand. This does not mean disengagement from action. It means action arising from coherence rather than pressure. Decisions feel cleaner. Effort becomes focused. Energy is no longer scattered. Over time, the new timeline stops feeling new. It feels normal. This is the moment when people often forget that a shift has occurred. Not because nothing changed, but because the change integrated so completely that it became identity. This is the true marker of a quantum shift. Not intensity, not excitement, not instant results, but sustainability. In the next section, we will explore how integration completes the process, and how living from the new timeline becomes effortless rather than intentional. Stay with this transition. Integration is the phase where the shift becomes lived reality rather than a conscious effort. At this stage, the new timeline is no longer something you are trying to access. It is something you are inhabiting. This is where many people misunderstand what living in alignment actually looks like. They imagine a constant sense of clarity, certainty, or emotional elevation. In practice, integration is much quieter. Integration means that the nervous system no longer treats the new state as unfamiliar. The body recognizes it as safe. The mind stops questioning it. The emotional system no longer braces for loss or reversal. When this happens, attention naturally moves away from trying to maintain the shift and towards simply living. This is why people often miss the moment integration occurs. There is no dramatic marker, no announcement, no instant validation. Instead, there is a subtle absence of friction. Decisions feel simpler, reactions soften, old triggers lose intensity. The new timeline stabilizes because it is no longer being evaluated. This is also where effort decreases. Practices that once felt intentional begin to feel organic. Regulation happens faster. Awareness returns more easily. The system no longer needs constant reminders to stay coherent. At this level, identity has reorganized. You are no longer acting as someone who is trying to change. You are functioning as someone who has already changed. This does not mean life becomes free of challenge. It means challenges are processed differently. They are met with responsiveness instead of reflex, curiosity instead of fear, adaptation instead of resistance. The quantum field responds to this stability by reinforcing it. Reality begins to reflect continuity rather than fluctuation. Opportunities align without force. Patterns reorganize without struggle. Outcomes appear less dramatic because they emerge naturally from the new configuration. This is the stage where many people attribute change to timing or luck, not realizing that coherence has quietly reshaped probability. Integration also brings discernment. You become more aware of what no longer fits. Certain environments, conversations, or habits lose their appeal. This is not rejection. It is resonance recalibrating. Letting go happens without conflict because attachment no longer carries the same charge. At this point, the old timeline is not being resisted. It is simply no longer being fed. This is why integration cannot be rushed. The system must learn through experience that the new state is sustainable. Each day lived from coherence reinforces this learning. Before moving forward, pause and notice. Where does life already feel less effortful than it used to? Where do reactions resolve more quickly? Where has something quietly shifted without requiring explanation? These are not minor details. They are indicators of integration. In the final section, we will explore how to continue living from this state without turning it into another goal, and how presence itself becomes the stabilizing force. Stay here. At this final stage, the shift no longer requires effort, strategy, or constant reinforcement. What sustains the new timeline is not technique, but presence. Presence is the state in which coherence maintains itself. When attention is grounded in the moment, the system naturally regulates. The mind stops projecting into lack. The body stops bracing for what has not happened. The emotional field stabilizes because it is no longer oriented toward anticipation or avoidance. This is why presence is not a spiritual ideal. It is a functional state. The more present you are, the less fragmented your signal becomes. And the less fragmented the signal, the more stable the timeline. Many people unintentionally sabotage integration by turning alignment into another task. They monitor themselves constantly. They evaluate whether they are doing it right. They worry about losing the state. But this monitoring reintroduces effort, and effort often carries tension. The new timeline stabilizes when alignment becomes lived rather than managed. This does not mean disengaging from growth or awareness. It means allowing coherence to express itself through ordinary life, through conversations, through choices, through rest, through action. At this point, the quantum field does not need convincing. It responds to what is consistently embodied. This is also where community becomes relevant. When people gather around shared language, shared inquiry, and shared presence, coherence amplifies. Not through belief, but through resonance. This is why learning spaces matter. Not as sources of authority, but as environments that support regulation and reflection. If something in this exploration has resonated, if you have noticed subtle shifts in perception, attention, or internal state, stay connected to this space. Subscribe. Return. Let these conversations continue to support integration rather than intensity. And before you move on, engage in one small act of reflection. In the comments, write a single word, not a sentence. One word that represents the loop you are ready to release, or the state you are ready to embody. It might be fear. It might be trust. It might be openness. It might be steadiness. Naming the pattern is not symbolic. It is an act of attention. And attention redirects energy. There is no urgency here, no pressure to change quickly. The shift unfolds through consistency, presence, and lived coherence. The version of you aligned with the new timeline is not somewhere else. It is already accessible in the way you breathe, move, choose, and respond. This is not the end of the process. It is the point where the process becomes life. Stay present, stay coherent, and allow the timeline to stabilize around who you already are becoming.